At my father's funeral, my mother-in-law leaned in so close I could smell the faint trace of her rose perfume mixed with mothballs. She whispered almost cheerfully, "This house is mine." I froze. My throat went dry, and for a moment I wondered if the church air conditioning had broken, because suddenly the air around me felt heavy, like a blanket pressed over my face. But no, it was just her words, sharp, deliberate, dropped into my ear like a shard of glass. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just smiled. A small, closed-lipped smile, the kind that says nothing and everything at once. Inside, though, my chest was pounding, my palms slick, and I swear I could hear my pulse louder than the hymns echoing off the stained glass windows. She didn't stop there. She repeated it, softer this time, like savoring a private victory. "This house, it's mine now." Let me tell you, it felt less like grief and more like being slapped across the face with ice water. Who says that at a funeral? Who looks at a coffin and thinks about square footage? I don't know how I kept my face still. Maybe shock, maybe survival. But I didn't let her see me break. And the thing is, I had no idea then that my silence, that one small smile, would turn into something she never saw coming. But let's rewind for a second. Funerals are supposed to be about family, about support, about holding one another up when the ground feels like it's collapsing under you. That's what I thought I'd get that day. My father was gone, the only person who had ever made me feel like I truly belonged in a family that often treated me like a placeholder. The church smelled faintly of lilies, the ones my cousin insisted on arranging herself. The organ hummed in the background, slow and steady. People were filing into the pews, tissues in hand, murmuring condolences that blurred together into a single hum of "I'm sorry." My husband sat 2 rows behind me, too busy making sure his mother was comfortable. That was her rule, always. She had to be centered, cushioned, acknowledged. She wore a black dress that looked more like a cocktail outfit than mourning clothes, complete with pearls that reflected the candlelight like tiny spotlights. I should have expected it. I really should have. Because nothing in my relationship with her had ever been normal. This wasn't the first time she'd tried to erase me with a sentence. Months earlier, at my husband's birthday, she raised a toast and ended it with, "This house has always been in our family, and it always will be." The emphasis wasn't lost on me. Her eyes had slid right over mine as she clinked glasses with him. Another time, during Christmas, she looked around my living room. Yes, my living room, decorated by me, paid for in equal part by me, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It still feels like my house." People chuckled awkwardly. I forced a laugh. That's what you do when you're cornered in front of family. So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised when she chose my father's funeral, of all days, to twist the knife deeper. But shock doesn't care about logic. It still burned. I remember gripping the folded funeral program so tightly that the edges dug into my palm. I remember the way her lipstick barely smudged as she leaned back, satisfied, like she'd just checked something off her to-do list. Around us, no one noticed. Or maybe they did and pretended not to, which sometimes feels worse. My aunt dabbed at her eyes. The pastor cleared his throat. My husband adjusted his tie and smiled politely at a distant cousin. And I sat there, silent, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. You know that feeling when the ground shifts beneath you, but everyone else seems to be standing steady? That's what it was like. My entire world tilting, while everyone else just hummed hymns and shook hands. But here's the part that made my smile real, even if only for a second. She had no idea what was coming, because in my purse, folded and sealed, was an envelope my father had given me weeks before he passed. He told me to keep it safe, told me there might come a time when I'd need it. I hadn't opened it in front of anyone yet, not even my husband. And as I sat there in the front pew, her whisper still stinging my ear, I realized that time had arrived. Before I go further, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what happened next, because trust me, this wasn't just about a house, it was about everything. Now, let's go back to me. 2 days before the funeral, I remember standing in my kitchen, staring at the casserole dishes I'd promised to bring. That was my focus back then. Food, flowers, music, All the little things that make a service feel like love instead of loss. I thought if I got those details right, maybe it would soften the grief. Maybe it would keep my family together for a few hours. The morning of, I woke up early, too early. The sky was still pale gray, not even fully awake, and I was already pacing my living room. My dress was laid out. Black, plain, respectful. My shoes were polished the night before. I kept checking my bag like some nervous student tissues, phone on silent, the folded envelope from my father, tucked into the inside pocket like it was just another item on the checklist. I drove slowly to the church, like I was dragging time itself. The streets were quiet, a few joggers, a mail truck, nothing unusual. But every stoplight felt longer than it should, like the universe wanted me to think about what was waiting for me. When I pulled up, the parking lot was half full. Rows of cars, some I recognized, some belonging to relatives I hadn't seen in years. The air smelled of rain, though the sky was clear. I carried the casserole dish in both hands, heat seeping through the foil into my palms. It gave me something to focus on besides the fact that my father's name was on the program. Inside, it looked exactly like you'd imagine. Candles flickering, floral arrangements everywhere, the kind of arrangements you never actually buy for your own home. Lilies, roses, sprays of baby's breath, all trying to disguise the heaviness. People whispered in clusters, their words blurring together into that low funeral murmur. My husband was already there, standing beside his mother, always beside her. He gave me a small nod, the kind you'd give a stranger across a room. I wanted more, but I didn't ask for it. And then there was her, my mother-in-law. Perfect posture, pearls catching the light, eyes scanning the room like she owned it. She accepted condolences with a smile that looked rehearsed, practiced in the mirror. I should have known she was rehearsing something else too. At first, I tried to play along with the normal script. I placed my casserole dish on the long table near the back. I hugged a cousin. I even managed to laugh softly when someone told a story about my dad fixing a car with duct tape and prayer. For a few moments, it almost felt like family, but under it all, there were cracks. The way she looked at me, like I was a guest instead of a daughter-in-law. The way my husband avoided eye contact. The way no one asked me how I was holding up. I kept thinking, maybe it was just the grief talking. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But my gut didn't buy it. My gut kept whispering, this isn't about the funeral. This is about the house. See, the house had always been a quiet war. My father left it to me. He'd told me that much before he passed, but no one else knew yet. He didn't trust them. He said, keep it close until the time comes. I didn't know the time would be the very morning of his funeral. I walked down the aisle, program in hand, and sat in the front row. The organist started playing softly, something slow, something meant to soothe. I told myself to breathe, to stay steady. And that's when she leaned in. That's when she said it. This house is mine. Outwardly, I smiled. Inwardly, I thought about that envelope burning in my bag. You ever get the sense that the entire room is watching you, even when no one's looking? That's how it felt, like the air itself was waiting for my response. But I gave her nothing. Not yet. I just folded the program tighter in my lap, the edges digging deeper into my palm, and stared straight ahead at the altar. Because I knew something she didn't. Her whisper wasn't the end of the story. It was only the opening act. And what she didn't expect was that my father had written his own final line long before she ever whispered hers. This wasn't new. That whisper in the church wasn't the first time she tried to erase me. It was just the loudest. Years back, when I first married her son, she made a show of handing me a set of keys. A little silver ring with a house key dangling off it. She pressed it into my palm like a gift, smiled wide enough for everyone to see, then leaned close so only I could hear. Don't get too comfortable. Guests don't keep keys forever. I laughed then. Nervous, awkward, the way you do when you're still trying to be liked. But that night, lying awake in what was supposed to be my new home, the words kept replaying. Guests. She called me a guest. It didn't stop there. Thanksgiving, year 2 of our marriage, I spent hours cooking pumpkin pie, green bean casserole, even a turkey that somehow came out golden instead of dry. I was proud, maybe a little too proud. She took one bite, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and said, "Well, it's edible. But don't worry, honey, next year we'll just cater." Everyone chuckled like she was being funny. I sat there smiling, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, feeling small. Christmas after that, she wrapped a gift in red foil paper and slid it across the table. I opened it, expecting maybe a scarf, maybe something thoughtful. It was a cookbook. She tapped the cover and said, "So you can practice." Her pearls caught the light as she laughed. My husband didn't say a word. I kept telling myself to let it go, that it was just her way, that if I tried hard enough, smiled enough, hosted enough, cooked enough, maybe she'd soften. But the truth is, it wasn't about cooking or houses or holidays. It was about control. She wanted to remind me, over and over, that no matter what I did, I'd never really belong. And every time I swallowed it, every time I chose silence, it chipped away at me a little more. By the time my father passed, I was already raw. He was the one who told me I wasn't invisible. He was the one who hugged me after Christmas when everyone else ignored the sweater I bought for the family exchange. He was the one who said, "You're worth more than their smallness." So when she whispered in that church, it wasn't just about real estate. It wasn't even about her. It was about years of being dismissed, minimized, made into background noise, and maybe that's why I smiled. Not because I found it funny, but because something inside me finally clicked into place, like watching dominoes fall, one by one, until the last piece tipped. The truth is, my father knew. He knew how she treated me. He knew my husband would never stand up to her. He knew his house would become a battlefield if he didn't put it in writing. That's why he gave me the envelope. I remember the day he pressed it into my hand. We were in his kitchen, the smell of coffee lingering, even though it was late afternoon. His hands shook a little, but his voice was steady. "Keep this safe. Don't open it unless you have to. And when the time comes, don't be afraid to use it." I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to imagine the day I'd need it. But now, sitting in that pew, her whisper still burning in my ear, I understood. She thought she'd won. She thought my silence meant surrender. What she didn't know was that my father had already written the ending. And the more I replayed her words, the stronger I felt. Like every insult, every smirk, every cookbook, and catered Thanksgiving had been leading here, to this exact moment. I didn't plan it this way. I never wanted a scene. But grief does strange things. It strips you down to the truth. And the truth was, I wasn't going to let her steal one more thing from me. Not my father's memory, not his house, not my place in this family. So I sat there, quiet on the outside, but with a decision already blooming inside me. A decision I knew would change everything. And she had no idea it was coming. The service moved forward, like grief on autopilot. Hymns sung from wrinkled booklets, the pastor's voice steady but low, family members taking turns stepping up to speak. Words about love, about legacy, about memory, and yet all I could hear was her whisper circling in my head. "This house is mine." Over and over, like a drumbeat. I sat there, clutching the folded program, until my palms were damp and the paper edges had left small grooves in my skin. My chest felt tight, my throat thick. The kind of heaviness you get before a storm breaks. And in that storm, her pearls glinted. Her posture stayed perfect. Her lips curled into that tiny, satisfied smirk. She thought it was done. She thought I'd swallowed it, like I always had. But then the pastor said my name. It was my turn to speak. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress with one hand, gripping the envelope with the other. My heels clicked against the wooden floor of the aisle, each step sharp, louder in my own ears than the organ behind me. I felt eyes on me, cousins, aunts, neighbors, some watching with kindness, some with curiosity, and one pair, hers, watching like a hawk circling prey. I walked to the podium, heart pounding so hard I thought the microphone might pick it up. I set down the program. I took a breath. And then, instead of pulling out the little note I'd prepared about my father's patience, his humor, his Saturday morning pancakes, I reached into my bag and I pulled out the envelope. The room seemed to shift. A murmur rippled through the pews. Paper against wood sounded impossibly loud as I laid it on the podium and tore it open. "This," I said, my voice steady though my knees wobbled, "is my father's last letter to this family." Silence. You could hear the creak of the pews as people leaned forward. I unfolded the pages. My father's handwriting curved across the lines, familiar and steady, even in his last months. And then I read. He wrote about love first, about raising me in that house, about memories carved into its walls, about the way he believed a home wasn't just a building, but the people who kept it alive. And then he wrote the words that slice through the air, sharper than any whisper. "I leave this house to my daughter. It is hers. Always." A gasp. Not one, but several, scattered across the room. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. My cousin shifted uncomfortably. My husband lowered his eyes to the floor. And my mother-in-law? She froze. Her lips parted, just barely. The smirk was gone. The pearls seemed to dull in the candlelight. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked caught. I kept reading. My father had thought of everything. He named me the sole inheritor of the house. He thanked me for being his caretaker when he was sick. He even wrote a line that felt like it was meant for her, though he never named her. Family is not decided by blood or marriage, but by loyalty and love. By the time I finished, my hands had stopped shaking. The words had steadied me. I looked out at the room. My voice was calm when I said, "My father's wishes are clear. This house is mine." Not a whisper, not a rumor. Written, sealed, and witnessed. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and set it on the podium. Then I looked directly at her. She blinked. Once, twice. And then she looked away. The organ started again, soft and uncertain, like even the music didn't know what to do. People shifted in their seats, whispering to one another, stealing glances between me and her, and for the first time I wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of their silence. She was. I stepped down from the podium, walked back to my seat, and sat down without a word. My smile was small, but this time it was real, because she had lost before the battle even began, and she knew it. The service ended, but the silence that followed was louder than the hymns. People filed out of the pews in small groups, murmuring, trading glances, like they'd just witnessed something too sharp to process. Some came to me with polite pats on the shoulder, words like, "Your father was a good man," or, "He'd be proud of you." But underneath, their eyes flicked between me and her, curious, maybe relieved it wasn't their fight. She didn't move right away. My mother-in-law stayed seated, spine stiff, hands clenched around her clutch like it was the last solid thing in the world. My husband leaned toward her, whispered something I couldn't hear. She didn't answer. She just kept staring straight ahead, jaw tight, pearls motionless against her collarbone. When she finally stood, it was slow, deliberate, the way someone stands in court when they're about to argue with a judge. She walked toward me, heels tapping on the wooden floor, and stopped just close enough that I could smell her perfume again. Roses, heavy, almost sour now. "You had no right," she whispered, voice clipped, every syllable like a stone. I met her eyes. It was my father's right, and his choice. Her nostrils flared. "You manipulated him. He wasn't thinking clearly." That one stung, not because I believed it, but because I knew she wanted to smear him to take me down. I kept my face steady, though my nails dug half-moons into my palms. "You weren't there," I said, my voice quiet but sharp. "When he was sick, when he couldn't walk from the bed to the kitchen without stopping to breathe. You weren't there. I was, every single day." Her lips tightened. For a moment I thought she'd lash out, raise her voice in front of everyone. But she didn't. She leaned closer instead, her voice dropping low. "You think this is over? It isn't." I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. The envelope in my bag already had the last word. Behind us, people lingered in the doorway. My aunt shifted awkwardly, pretending to study a flower arrangement. My cousin whispered something to her husband and avoided eye contact. Even the pastor stood frozen near the altar, pretending to shuffle papers but clearly listening. And then my husband spoke. "Mom." Just one word, but enough to cut through the air. His face was pale, eyes darting between us, as though he finally realized he couldn't stay neutral forever. She's right, Dad's wishes were clear. Her head snapped toward him like she couldn't believe he'd chosen a side. "You're defending her?" He swallowed hard, glanced down, then back at her. "I'm respecting Dad." For the first time, her mask cracked. A flash of betrayal, like she'd been abandoned on a battlefield she thought she controlled. I should have felt triumphant. Maybe part of me did. But mostly, I felt tired, exhausted from years of swallowing slights, from holding my breath in rooms where she decided whether I belonged. Still, I stood tall. "This was never about winning," I said, my voice carrying further than I expected. "It's about honoring my father, and I won't apologize for that." She stared at me for a long moment, face flushed beneath her powder. Then she turned sharply, pearls swinging, and walked out without another word. The room exhaled. Literally. People shifted, moved, coughed, like they'd been holding their breath through the entire exchange. My aunt came over and touched my arm. "You did the right thing," she whispered, though her eyes flicked nervously toward the doors she had just stormed through. My husband stayed quiet. He didn't reach for my hand, but he also didn't follow her. That, in its own way, was something. Outside, the sky had darkened, though it wasn't late. Clouds had gathered, heavy and gray, pressing low like the weight of everything that had just happened. I stepped onto the church steps, the wooden envelope still tucked in my bag, and drew in a breath that felt different, lighter, sharper. She might fight me later. She might scheme, twist, whisper more poison. But the truth was out, and truth has a way of holding its ground, even when people don't like it. I walked to my car with my head high. People watched, some nodding, some avoiding my gaze. My heels clicked against the concrete, each step steady, firm, like punctuation marks on a sentence that had taken years to write. And behind me, I could almost feel her eyes burning holes into my back, promising this wasn't the end. Maybe it wasn't. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The drive home felt longer than usual, though it was the same 30 minutes it always took. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, knuckles pale against the leather. The envelope sat beside me on the passenger seat, the flap now folded but the weight of it heavier than ever. My father's words lingered in my ears like a hymn that wouldn't fade. "This house is yours, always." When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Red brick, shutters that needed repainting, the oak tree stretching its arms wide in the front yard. The same place I'd grown up, where summers meant lemonade on the porch, and winters meant blankets piled by the fireplace. It hadn't changed, but I had. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and old books, scents that clung to the walls like memory. The floorboards creaked under my heels, familiar, almost comforting. For a moment I stood there in the quiet, listening. It was strange grief and relief, braided together in the same breath. I walked through the rooms slowly, like greeting old friends. The kitchen where my dad burned pancakes but insisted on calling them crispy style. The hallway lined with family photos, some faded, some crooked. The living room with the sagging couch where I once fell asleep watching late-night television with him. Everywhere I looked, he was there, not in body, but in presence. I paused at the dining room table, running my hand along the edge. This was where holidays had played out like battles, where she had critiqued my cooking, dismissed my efforts, carved me down with a smile. I thought of her whisper at the funeral, the way her pearls shone as she claimed what wasn't hers. My jaw tightened. But then I thought of my father, the way he made space for me at this table, no matter how small she tried to make me feel. The way he pulled out a chair, winked, and said, "This one's reserved." And something softened. I realized the house wasn't about her. It wasn't even about winning. It was about remembering what he built, what he left behind, and what he trusted me to carry forward. Later that evening, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat on the porch, the envelope in my lap. The sky had turned lavender, cicadas buzzing in the trees. I opened the letter again, tracing the ink with my finger. His words weren't just instructions. They were love etched onto paper. He'd seen me. He'd trusted me. That meant more than any inheritance. My phone buzzed on the railing. A text from my husband. "Are you home?" I typed back. "Yes." A pause. Then another message. "I'll come by tomorrow. We need to talk." I didn't know what that conversation would hold. Maybe guilt. Maybe excuses. Maybe nothing at all. But for the first time, I wasn't bracing myself. Whatever he chose, whatever side he stayed on, I knew where I stood. The truth was written, the house was mine, and so was my peace. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across the floor. I brewed another pot of coffee and sat at the table, staring out the window at the oak tree. The grief was still there, a quiet ache, but it was laced now with something steadier. Resolve. I thought about her, how she'd left the church without looking back, pearls swinging like armor. I knew she'd scheme, whisper, maybe even try to challenge the will. But the difference now was simple. I wasn't scared anymore. Because she had fought with shadows, with whispers, with smirks in crowded rooms. And my father had fought with pen and paper, with clarity, with truth. Truth endures longer than whispers. When my husband arrived later that day, he stood in the doorway like he didn't recognize the place. Or maybe he didn't recognize me. I invited him in, poured him coffee, and we sat in silence for a while. Finally, he said, "She's furious." I nodded. "I know. She says she'll contest it." I looked down at the envelope on the table, then back at him. "She can try, but this isn't about her anymore." He studied me, searching for the woman who used to fold under the weight of his mother's words. Maybe she was gone, or maybe she'd just grown into herself. We didn't resolve everything that day. Some things take longer than one conversation, but when he left, he kissed my forehead, and it felt like something had shifted. Small, but real. That night, I lit a candle on the mantel. Not for her, for him, for my father. The flame flickered, warm and steady, casting soft shadows against the photos on the wall. I whispered, "Thank you." And as the candle burned, I felt the house breathe around me. Not a possession, not a prize, but a legacy. My father's legacy, my home. She may never understand that. She may keep fighting, keep grasping for control. But in the quiet of that house, in the soft glow of candlelight, I understood something she never could. Whispers fade. Paper burns. Pearls lose their shine. But love, loyalty, and truth, those last. And for the first time in years, I felt free.